facilitator of the CIS Summit. My name is Bims, and I'm going to be one of your room hosts for today. I have important housekeeping items to share with you before we begin. Emergency exits are located by the left side of the room, and we have the bathroom located across the lobby behind the elevators. Please remember to silence all your devices. And if you have not already done so, please download our AWS app from your app stores, and please share all your feedback for each session at the end of the event. All AWS sessions will be recorded and will be made available at the end of the event. For today, Reimagine the public cloud experience with AWS Governance. Please welcome to the stage Brett Miller, Mark Nene, and Brian Price. Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for coming out this morning. Welcome to the Public Sector Summit. My name is Brett Miller. I'm a solutions architect with AWS. Been here for about 5.5 years with AWS. Here joins me today is Mark McInerney, a project manager at NASA, and Brian Price, the CEO of CloudTamer. This morning we're going to talk about governance at scale. Has anyone ever heard of governance at scale before? Hopefully some of us, right? This is actually a big effort that we took on starting about 4 years ago, when we started seeing a pattern with a lot of large enterprises. We started talking to commercial CIOs and public sector CIOs, and we started seeing a theme. A lot of CIOs say, I just need an easy button, right? I need an easy button. I need a governance system that has no manual processes in it whatsoever. It's super easy to use. It's great for technical people, but also great for non-technical people, because the journey to the cloud is much more than just a technical approach, right? You have to change the culture. So we invented governance at scale. In fact, one of our commercial CIOs of a large bank that was moving to AWS told us very discreetly, it has to be super easy and it needs to be very visual. In fact, he used a movie reference in describing what he would like to see. Has anyone seen the movie Minority Report? He said, I want my cloud and my single dashboard to look like Minority Report. I want to see the entire organization. I want to see where hotspots are, who's underburning, who's overburning their funding. I want to know who's secure and who's not secure. I want it to be very easy for anyone in my organization to manage cloud. And it needs to scale infinitely. 100 accounts, thousands of accounts, doesn't matter. It needs to scale. The journey of governance at scale was born on that day. And after about 3 years, we figured out a lot working with large customers like NASA and CMS, what works and what doesn't. So what we're here today is to share the experiences of governance at scale with 2 large AWS customers, CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, and NASA. 2 completely different customers, 2 completely different missions, but all have some of the same challenges and commonalities. And we're going to discuss how governance at scale is helping them achieve their missions. All right. So what is the agenda? We're going to talk about two large AWS customers, NASA and CMS, talk about the common goals of unique missions and how governance at scale is helping them go faster with more confidence to AWS. Then I'm going to bring up about a Mark from NASA who's going to talk about specifically how governance at scale is helping them kind of remodernize the way that they're handling governance, especially around data governance in the cloud. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about CMS, or the Centers for Medicaid Services, and how they're adopting the AWS Governance at Scale platform, and specifically a tool that we're also going to discuss, and how they're managing their cloud at scale. I'm going to go through AWS Governance at Scale 101 in case you haven't heard it yet. And then I'm going to bring up Brian Price and talk about their product that embraces the Governance at Scale framework and is being used throughout public sector and commercial customers. So let's go ahead and get started. Achieving the common goals of unique missions, right? We're going to talk about 2 use cases, NASA and CMS. On the surface, you would think they're completely different. One's space, one's healthcare. But there's actually a lot of commonalities as they move to AWS, right? They have a lot of the same challenges. And we built governance at scale to be kind of the Swiss Army knife no matter what your mission is, to help you go faster with more confidence to AWS and decreasing the amount of manual process it takes to govern lots of AWS accounts. So if you're starting your cloud journey, a lot of enterprises think, well, I'm just moving my systems to AWS from my traditional data centers into the cloud, right? But they find out very quickly the transformation is much more than just moving servers, right? You have to move the entire enterprise to the cloud. And that's more than just the technical pieces, right? We want to concentrate on the technical components, but there's so much more. To be successful, you really not only have to move the technology, but you also have to move the people and the processes and the culture. So we had to address this very directly in AWS Governance at Scale. We had to figure out not only how to move the technical pieces, but also the non-technical portions and the roles so they can be effective in the cloud. Because if the technical people are the only people that know how to use the cloud, then the entire enterprise isn't going to be able to adopt it at the scale they want to. We try to take this on very strongly with Governance at Scale. We find that after I've traveled across enterprises for the last 4 years, I've learned there's a lot of patterns here. Most customers fall into 2 stages of adoption. First stage is more of what we call stage 1. This is where the pioneers are putting the first apps into AWS. They can usually do it very quickly because it's a small group. They're just using manual-based processes. They're only using certain services, and they can kind of get things done very quickly. This usually results in a high level of success for those apps. And they start declaring success and they start advertising it to their agency. And then all of a sudden, the entire agency wants to move to the cloud, right? And it's not as easy to take one app to the cloud. It's much easier to take one app to the cloud versus 100, right? There's a lot of scale issues you have to deal with. So that's when you move into phase 2. Phase 2 is where not only you have singular applications moving to the cloud, but you have an entire enterprise. Hundreds of users, hundreds of apps, using all different types of services. And this is where the manual-based approaches tend to fail. If you're using spreadsheets to do cost, or you're using spreadsheets to do compliance, this is where you really fall short. A lot of those manual-based processes just don't scale very well. Common governance challenges we've seen across public sector and commercial customers. Organizational support. You need to have buy-in from your whole organization, not just your developers. So you have to bring the non-technical folks into the fold and have them be successful just like the technical folks. Very important. You need to have business unit autonomy. This is very important to large customers. They want to make sure that all their divisions of their agency can use AWS as a self-service model to mimic the way that they would use it if they were out in their house or actually doing it out on their own. You also need to do delegation. One of the keys to Governance at Scale is all about delegation of authorities, right? You can't just have one group govern all cloud access and everything cloud for an entire agency. At some point, those groups will become usually a blocker for adoption. You need to delegate a lot of those authorities out closer to the data and the applications so business units can have the ability to be successful. You also need a multi-account strategy, right? We address this at Governance at Scale. How do you align all of your accounts to your organizational hierarchy so it makes sense and it's familiar? We address that as well. And integration is important. You can't just come to the cloud and reinvent every process you have. You need to integrate what you have into the automation, which is governed cloud. So we talk about that a lot around Governance at Scale as well. So let's talk a little bit about the 2 use cases we're going to discuss today. CMS and NASA, as I said, completely different agencies, completely different missions, all have a lot of the same cloud adoption challenges and utilizing Governance at Scale as a solution. They both want to accelerate adoption, right? You want to bring all of your apps, all your people, all your processes into the cloud, and you want to make it super easy. You want that easy button, right? You want the single pane of glass. That's one of the things we address with Governance at Scale. You want to deliver a controlled but flexible cloud environment, right? You want to get to as close as swiping a credit card like you would in the outside world, but in an enterprise environment. So it needs to be easy, but also controlled, and we're going to discuss that as we go forward. And we obviously want to make it easier for applications to move faster and get the benefits of cloud. So that being said, to talk about the first use case, I'm going to bring up Mark, and he's going to talk about how NASA is using the cloud and some of their challenges and how they're using the Governance at Scale framework and the CloudTamer tool to address some of their long-term challenges.
All right, good morning. Thanks, Brett. So I have a couple charts in the beginning just to give some context of the organization I work in, the type of mission that we support. And then I'm going to move on to some of the cloud work that we're doing, and then specific to the session. So it's a progression. So I am part of the EOS DIS. That's the Earth Observing System Data Information System. And we are responsible for archiving and distributing NASA Earth science data. And this data comes from airborne missions, International Space Station. We have instruments that hang off the International Space Station, and we capture that data, field campaigns like institute data, so on and so forth. And we cover multiple science disciplines, including the land coverage, ocean dynamics, atmosphere, cryosphere, human dimensions, and so on and so forth. Since I have a lot of charts, I'm going to go a little fast, but I think this is just setting the stage, right? So this is the lay of the land, our disbursement across the United States of where our organization sits. And you'll see how these will tie in the coming charts. So our DAX is a Data Active Archive Center. That's the rectangle-ish looking item. We have 12 of those, and they're spread out from California to Alaska, Sioux Falls, so on and so forth. So we're quite geographically dispersed is the message I wanted you to get from this chart. We also have SIPs. These are our science processing systems. The organizations that, well, that's the next chart, right? So just keep in mind, these are geographically dispersed, and they're also science discipline specific, so we have silos of science data spread out in multiple data active archive centers. So in a nutshell, it's probably what you would expect. We have, say, a satellite. The data comes off the satellite, and then between the lower level products, the raw data, we capture, clean, and process, add science value to those data, archive it, and then we put them inside our DAX systems, and then we subset and distribute to our users. We have about 4 million users, the last check, and so that's our process and are pretty much what we do as an organization. Again, I'm going fast because I just wanted to set the stage here. Here's one mission I wanted to point out. It's one we're currently working to support. It's the NISAR mission. It launches, I believe, still in December of 2021. It's NASA in Israel, which is the Indian Space Research Organization, and it's a synthetic aperture radar mission. It's one of our larger ones as far as data goes, right? So we're estimating that's about 80 terabytes a day in new data generation, and we reprocess or expect to reprocess about 400 terabytes a day, which will round us out in a 5-year mission of about 150 petabytes for this one mission. A lot of times missions go a little bit longer, but that's the planned time, so this could even get bigger. This is just one mission of the many we support. So NASA's motivation for going to the cloud, really it's three-pronged. There's a lot, of course, but if we boil it down to three, this chart will help us highlight that. So our projected rapid growth of these new missions, like NISAR and others, which I won't be able to get into detail here, forced us to rethink our current architecture, right? How are we going to support these large missions, and they come more rapidly? Feels like it every year anyway. If you look to the chart on the right, the projected data volumes, right now we're about 27 petabytes, right? And in 6 years or so, we'll be topping off in the projection of above 300 petabytes. So that's a pretty rapid growth for us. Nothing we can't handle, but it forced us to look at different ways to re-architect, which is why we moved on to the Amazon cloud. The data systems, right? This is the promise of cloud for the data systems people, right? We were in the re-architecture thinking, the flexibility, scalability of our ability to ingest, archive, and distribute this mission data for NASA. And we believe it's going to allow us to keep pace with the new mission advancements that are rapidly coming. I have a systems background, but I also am a meteorologist, so the science users is, for me, the end goal. So when we have these large amounts of data sets that are geographically dispersed today, for example, a coupled model for modelers use ocean data, and they use atmosphere data because the Earth is a coupled system. Right now, they'd have to invest in an IT infrastructure, download petabytes from one DAC, download petabytes from the other DAC, do some processing, repeat. This is costly, timely, et cetera. So many of you may have heard the term data lake, right? Or bringing your algorithms to the data. That's what this means, right? This is really exciting for us. This is going to help expedite science discovery, which we believe quite heavily. So our solution, we're calling it the Earth Data Cloud. It is a managed cloud. It's obviously on Amazon. We already have shown that it improves our efficiency for NASA data systems operations, and we have an open data policy. This will be important in the coming charts to understand. We suck all this data in, and it's our mission to give it to everybody across the globe, right? Open. We're building this for ourselves, so our EOS DIS organization, our 18 plus SIPs or DACs, for us to stand up our mission requirements. In other words, scientists aren't going to come in our cloud. We're just going to put it in the cloud. They would get their own Amazon account or other and touch the data that way. And increase opportunity for researchers and commercial users to access the petabytes of data more quickly. This is the data lake, right? Other methods in Amazon that you'll be able to do that with. All right, so here's some components of the Earth Data Cloud. There's probably more, but I just broke them down to 7. We have a cloud infrastructure component, the mission data management component. This would be the application layer custom built for us in our environment to ingest, archive, and distribute the bulk mission data. Data services and analytics. These are the transformational services, subsetting, orthorectification, and other advanced level type services that we'll provide in this data lake, if you will. I didn't mention it in the chart before, but organizational governance is important to us because these 18 different organizations spread across the United States that support our mission are different. Some are NASA centers, some are other US government agencies, some are contract organizations to universities. And so having one governance process was pretty important to us, and so we stood that up. Budget controls for obvious reasons, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the coming charts as part of a component. We have rich metrics management, which is really exciting for managers like myself. We're able to view inside the system pretty well. And we have a community development model. This isn't community as far as external, but internal. We have some 500 people in our organization across all those different DACs and SIPs, and they pretty much develop code for their environment and launch it, but now in a shared environment, we'll be able to use everybody's expertise to build that one system. I know I'm going fast, but this should be pretty explanatory. Okay, so the cloud platform infrastructure does break down into the common pieces you might expect: user services, networking, security services, common services controls, and governance of cloud accounts. I don't have time to talk about all those today. This is a deck from a larger briefing, so I broke it down into these primary categories, which now fits more to the session talk that we're at. Governance of cloud accounts, common service controls, and budgets is what I'm going to talk about. So the Earth Data Cloud platform infrastructure, it's a multi-account infrastructure as a service. Obviously, it's on Amazon, and we have one single top-level payer account. This is important to us. We didn't want to have multiple, right? And the takeaway from this chart is providing shared cloud services and controls for our entire organization, right? So let's talk about some of those real quick. So NASA approved Amazon services. You know, if you're in DC, you're probably familiar with FedRAMP, right? There's, how do we get approved services on platform for us to use? Third-party SaaS services, what is our process for that? Our focus is using cloud-native services, but the point here I want to mention is with the diversity of our organization and different agencies and different contracts, if we had multiple Amazon accounts, those would all look very different, and we wouldn't be able to integrate very well across our organization because contracts would be different, access to Amazon would be different, the tools and services would be different, and it would kind of break our community development model. So this theme kind of plays out in all 4 of these bullets. We have code deployment services, DevOps, CI/CD pipelines, so these organizations don't have to recreate them. There's some challenges on transitioning to one, but nevertheless we have it, so it allows us to scan our code, build, and deploy to the Earth Data Cloud, right? We don't want multiples of these. We want to support as few as possible, and on platform, we have that capability for everybody in our organization to take advantage of. Use of infrastructure as a code, this is reusing templates to define this multi-account ecosystem, and then comes to play as CloudTamer. This is a partnership I value. We use CloudTamer to identify and access, and support our access management, allows us to rotate our Amazon keys, applies session limits, and provides role-based access controls, right? One service that services our managed cloud for everybody. So they didn't pick different tools or otherwise. So user access, again, CloudTamer plays a huge role in this for us, right? This is uniform access for our organization to get into the cloud, right? It supports multiple identity management systems, but from a user perspective, they were able to click using their PIV badges and get in and access the cloud. Two-factor authentication, obviously, and this allows us to have one centralized, trusted access point to authenticate our users getting into the cloud, including developers and those that just need financial views and so on and so forth. And also, I guess it's worth mentioning that we are able to, you can have one, each user gets access to the place that they are allowed to go. They're not going to see another DAX, they'll only see theirs or their financial view, and so it allows us to manage that accordingly. User authentication, I guess I just said that, so it controls who views what finances, accesses Amazon resources, and who manages and who manages the finance resources, and so on and so forth. CloudTamer manages our IAM roles, policies, and organizational level. This is huge, right? Because having one tool to do that for us is quite important. All right, so this is our account structure. This is what CloudTamer allows us to view. This is a conceptual diagram which helps me to talk about how it looks inside the cloud. But the top level is our OU. That's our top payer account, right? I mentioned that. And each of those below, those organizational units you can use them as our data centers, our DACs, a Data Active Archive Center. And there'll be 12 of those across eventually. Underneath those, each DAC has another OU that might break out accordingly to manage individual projects, a certain mission, an analytics capability, or whatever. Then the types of accounts we offer anybody in our organization, pretty much 3 of them. There's a development account, the test account, and production accounts, right? And we have various security levels on each of those. In the red, we have management and security accounts. That's how we operate and manage the cloud itself, our managed cloud itself. And this structure is working really well for us, right? We have about 107 users now. We're probably close to maybe 100 accounts in the next couple months, and so we're rapidly growing, which I'll mention here in a second as well. So this is our structure viewed actually from inside CloudTamer as well, and it allows us to manage that way. I have to mention the Antideficiency Act. So when you're an organization, for those few of you that may not know, I'm sure everybody knows what this is, government agencies can't spend more money than they've been given, right? Makes sense, but there's a law against it, and those federal service can get in a lot of trouble for breaking it. So the Amazon pay-as-you-go model, for my organization, caused us a little bit of heartburn because we're in the goal of distributing and getting out as much as data we can, and petabytes of data, right? So we have a layered solution to protect us against this. Egress controls, egress breaker system. I don't have time to get into detail of it, but one of those layered controls and services is actually part of CloudTamer. And I'll slow a little bit here because I know I've been going fast, but this is important to us, making sure we don't break the ADA. When the lawyers pound the table and they say, guarantee me you don't break it, this helps us to ensure that. So each of those accounts, a development account, test account, production account, which I say we have close to 100 now, we'll have hundreds in the next few months as we rapidly grow. Each has their own identified budget cap. We do an exercise to determine those caps, not for this session, but once we know what that cap is, we can place it on there and developers can have at it. The system, which is the image you see, this is just a canned image, allows the developers to watch how they're spending, see what their projected spending is at that current rate. Allows the financial teams and mid-level managers and upper-level managers, everybody to have the view they need to monitor spend, which is pretty important from the business teams. So you can always go into the tool and look, but of course this, which is the beauty of this, is that not everybody can always look at these tools, and when you have hundreds of accounts, we have the ability to have alert spend monitoring. So we get emails, right? So you spent 50%, 60%, 70% of your budget, and then we have actions that CloudTamer lets us execute based off of where we are. 70% we go into a free spend, 80% we actually take down the systems without compromising security or any data loss. And really the idea here is to slow the burn rate and allow us to stay within the ADA. So there's a lot happening in our cloud. That was really a quick overview. This is my last chart, just to show you some of the stuff that we're doing, what's in production now and what's coming in next. So we currently have 3 primary things in production. The Sentinel data, which is an ESA mission, European Space Agency mission, where we collect the data out at the Alaska Satellite Facility in Fairbanks, and there's about 4 petabytes currently, which will double in the next few months. That's our first mission in cloud, to prove it out, right? There's a common metadata repository and the Earth data search client. As you might expect, these are tools to help us find and distribute data, whether it's in cloud or out of cloud. Helps us to manage the data assets that we control. On the left are pre-production. These are 6 key projects that are we've been working on for a while now, and that will be onboarding into the cloud in short order. GHRC is one of our DACs. It's in Marshall Space Flight Center. It's the Global Hydrology Resource Center, or GHRC. There's a lot of acronyms. I tried to spell them out for you. They're in parallel operations for the next 6 months with the anticipated cutover date sometime by the end of this year, right? That'll likely be our first DAC all in to Earth Data Cloud. We're really excited about that. I already mentioned the NISAR mission, the SWAP mission from our physical oceanography DAC, which is out at JPL. That is a surface water ocean topography mission, which should be into production around 2022, launches before that, but that's when it gets into production. And then Gitzi and Giovanni are more analytics, data services type tools, so we're not just focused on mission, which is why I put them there. We're also taking a significant look at the tools onboarding as well. So with that, I just want to leave you with this. We're really excited to say we have an operational platform now. Our partner, Raytheon, has really been instrumental in getting us to this point. We have a team of I think it's like 150 people when I look at we use a scaled agile framework, right? So our quarterly PI planning sessions, we have about 150 people in these rooms. There's a lot of people dedicated to this. Not all of them work on it, but a lot of them do to get us where we need to be today. And we have nearly, rounding up, 10,000 data sets to build out this data lake. What do we do next, right? So we are nearing the end of an activity for data set prioritization to determine what goes in next. And beginning October 1st, that's when we start having a rapid deployment of building out this data lake that I described earlier. So it's a really exciting time for us for organization. And I think that was my last chart. Excellent. Brett?
Awesome. Hey, thanks, Mark. So NASA, completely different use case, right? But all the same common challenges around governance, right? You need to provide the resources to be very agile to your enterprise, but also make sure it's very controlled. I want to discuss with you just a little bit about the other use case with CMS, or the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. I've been lucky enough to be part of this organization for a while, being the solutions architect at CMS. They have, CMS, if you don't know, runs a lot in AWS. They're a very important customer to us. They've been in our cloud for over 5 years, and they're running a lot of production applications there. Many of the applications a lot of Americans use are usually used by CMS. And I've had the unique opportunity to talk to leadership at CMS about governance at scale. They had some of the same challenges as NASA did. We have lots of different accounts. We're having hundreds of accounts. How do we manage them at scale, right? How do we make a very user-friendly environment, but also make sure that all the security controls and all the cost controls are in place, not through manual people doing those processes, but actually automation. So it was a very natural fit for governance at scale with a very large customer like CMS. They're one of our largest implementations of CMS, and it's working very well for their use cases. But just like any other enterprise moving to the cloud, you learn a lot as you go. It's a journey. Every journey is a little bit different. CMS's journey has been very unique, right? They've gotten a lot of applications into the cloud, but they've also had a lot of growing pains. As you move the culture and the technology and the people, nothing goes perfect, right? So some of their initial hurdles were making sure you could get accounts very quickly to users. They didn't want to wait a month or 6 or 8 weeks to get accounts. They wanted to be very fast, to be very natural, very easy progression. They wanted to make it very easy for cloud users to access the cloud. And of course, all the managers needed to be able to handle their budgets and onboarding transparency much easier than they have before. And lastly, they needed to make sure that all their accounts are going to be maintained from a high level of security and compliance. Governance at Scale helps out with that. Governance at Scale was just one part of a larger effort at CMS to kind of redesign what they were doing in the cloud. They've learned a lot over the last 5 years, and they wanted to take a look back on, are they doing it the right way? Should they do things differently? So for CMS, they started up an initiative called the CMS West Project. This is a rethinking or reimagining the way the cloud experience could be based on modern day technologies that weren't even available 5 years ago. Governance at Scale and the CloudTamer tool are part of that journey. A lot of agencies have guiding principles. I wanted to share these. These are CMS's guiding principles. These are principles that were aligned by the CIO and the CISO as kind of the path that everyone is going to go on. As you guys go down your journey, it's very important to have these principles. These give kind of a blueprint of the way everyone should be going in the same direction, and have basically everyone on the same sheet of music. So I did want to share that with you. Once again, Governance at Scale was just one piece of a larger effort to kind of remodernize and redesign the way that they're using cloud-based infrastructures. So that's CMS. Some of you may have never heard of Governance at Scale, so I wanted to give you kind of a very short description of actually what it is and how CMS and NASA are actually using it. The Governance at Scale framework, as I said originally, was born about 4 years ago when customers started asking Amazon the very simple question is, how do you manage thousands of accounts? Tell me how you guys do it. That will help us be able to grow successfully like Amazon. So Governance at Scale was our first attempt to give a lot of our best practices that we use internally to manage our global infrastructure and make them accessible to customers. Our white paper has been out on the internet for about a year or two. So if you haven't seen it, please take a look at it. This gives you kind of the blueprint for enterprise governance, cloud, and success, right? And who's using this? One of the important attributes is the way that we manage our global infrastructure. So we're for the first time giving that back to customers so they can do the same type of techniques to help them be successful and create that easy button that everybody wants. 3 principles of governance at scale. We worked back from the customer like in normal Amazon style. We found out that there's 3 major buckets that customers care about. Mark alluded to some of these. Account management. How do I manage 1,000 accounts? And how do I put in the automation to align with my organization? The key is actually aligning your cloud operations to your hierarchy. Not just some random hierarchy, but to your hierarchy. Your hierarchy is the basis for the way that you do funding. It's the basis, the way you do security. It's the way you do people and processes. It makes sense to actually align your cloud resources to that hierarchy. And then, based on that hierarchy, you can then put out policies which can enforce budgets at the top layer of an organization or all throughout the organizations. We figured out that customers need a many-to-many relationship with master payer accounts. They want to have different parts of their organization, have different accesses, different accounts, and you need to make it super easy to manage all that complexity and provide that single pane of glass to both technical and non-technical folks. And thirdly, compliance automation. If you bolt your cloud accounts to the hierarchy, it enables you to do a lot of policies that can enforce compliance at scale, right? Because every portion of an organization is different. A lot of times you'll have different compliance requirements. But if it's based on the hierarchy, you can push applicable policies to that part of the organization very easy, and then provide that visualization to everyone that needs to have it across a large enterprise. So embracing the Governance at Scale framework, 2 major customers, completely different missions, having the same challenges, right? And the Governance at Scale framework is able to help them do so. From a NASA perspective, they had their set of priorities when they started. They were around budget enforcement and policy enforcement, right? They wanted to make sure that all of the budgets across the organization could be maintained from a cloud standpoint. That was some of their priorities. CMS was a little different. They really wanted to automate the account provisioning process. They also wanted to make sure you could do budget planning, just like you do in normal IT operations. You want to plan and budget and enforce those budgets at scale. Both NASA, CMS, different missions, slightly different priorities, were able to use the governance at scale framework, which we produce on our website very, very easily. So the next portion, I'm going to bring up Brian Price from CloudTamer. Their product has embraced the governance at scale framework, and all the things that that Mark talked about are all built into their product. So this is a really forward-leaning product that's being used not only in these two customers, but also across public sector and commercial spaces. So that being said, I'm going to bring Brian up here to talk a little about how their tool uses governance at scale and what it's all about.
Great, thanks, Brett. And again, as Mark mentioned, good morning to everybody. Hopefully everybody is having a good start to the Public Sector Summit. So, first and foremost, one thing that we found in our partnership with AWS is these principles that Brett kind of alluded to, and if you haven't already, I encourage you to go out and take a chance to read through the Governance at Scale white paper, because regardless of our product or using other solutions that you have in your environment, they really are foundational to the way that organizations can begin to take and scale their overall cloud usage across their environment, and as frictionless of an experience as possible for your end users across the organization. So just take a few minutes just to highlight a little bit about CloudTamer, some of the unique features that our product kind of has provided, again, aligning to governance at scale, some of the things that Mark and Brett even alluded to earlier. So, one of the things that we kind of found initially within organizations is as they begin to grow and scale their cloud presence, and you add more and more and more accounts, it's extremely important to kind of take and align those accounts to the way that the organization makes sense. A lot of times the organization, has these accounts in these different locations. It's really hard to kind of get an understanding and a visual presence of overall what your cloud presence looks like. So CloudTamer helps organize that. And so we have kind of 3 pillars that we align pretty closely with the governance at scale framework with account management, budget enforcement, and compliance automation. But I'll highlight a couple things that's different around kind of our approach than some other products and solutions that you may have heard of, or methodologies that you may have heard of as well. So first off, one foundational principle that we kind of stuck with from the very beginning was we didn't want to be a cloud broker. And a cloud broker is typically a technology that sits between the end user and their cloud service provider. And so at its surface, that approach seems to be a great way of ensuring commonality across the enterprise. But the reality that we found is as cloud use scales in the organization, you start to have users that are maybe more technical and they want to get access to the latest and greatest services. If you're using a technology that unfortunately abstracts some of those services, that is not always possible, and that technology would have to keep pace with that. So instead, the approach that we've taken is really to make it so it's super easy for users to be able to get access to the native cloud service provider consoles like the AWS console, whether it's via access keys programmatically or via the web console, and they can deploy and use services the day they're released if the organization allows them from a security policy perspective. The other piece that Mark kind of alluded to in his presentation was around policies, right? And notifications just aren't good enough in organizations, right? People take vacations, right? It's summer. Who doesn't have a vacation probably planned, right? And if you're notifying somebody and they're out of the office that maybe a budget overrun has happened or a security event has happened, and that's where you stop, there's a potential for a huge risk the organization is taking. So we have an engine that really applies enforcement around that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through the next couple slides. And then lastly, the important thing that we found was it's really critical for most organizations to have a way that they can talk about their cloud in a consistent fashion, whether that's your technical users, whether that's your leadership, and having a single picture to enable that is extremely, extremely important. So I'll talk briefly about those kind of three pillars, how we kind of align them, what those kind of features really look like. So first and foremost, around account management. And Mark alluded to this, and Brett kind of did too, that everybody has some way that they kind of visualize what their picture of the cloud looks like, right? So their organization differs, right? NASA's organization and the way that Mark has to kind of imagine and look about where these new missions that are launching and where the data exists is very different than the healthcare use case that Brett was describing, right? But the importance is to be able to kind of model your organization, however wide, however deep, however siloed, or however integrated it is, to a model that makes sense for you to be able to look and understand what your cloud presence looks like, and to also be able to start answering questions about what that presence looks like in context of what's going on in terms of the mission. So we allow you to do that in CloudTamer, and it really provides a great starting point to be able to get answers to some key questions. Secondly, we also make it extremely easy for people to get access into cloud accounts. So I mentioned we kind of have not gone down this path of being a broker. So instead, what we do is we tie into existing systems that organizations have in their enterprise for authentication, whether they're a system like NASA has, which is a fairly custom implementation of a SAML provider, or something that's more ubiquitous like Active Directory across the enterprise. And the users log into a single place, and from that single place, they can then get into all of their other accounts and resources. And that experience is really easy, because then you don't have to remember a ton of different usernames and passwords. You reduce that security footprint actually to a more isolated place from an access perspective. And the last thing, as Brett alluded to, and we work really exclusively very hard with CMS with this, is making the account provisioning process as simple and easy as possible. So as a person on the outside of an organization, when they go to say, I want a brand new AWS account, they can swipe a credit card and get that. A lot of times when we talk to organizations, they say their average experience is anywhere, instead of 2 minutes on the outside, can be 2 weeks up to 2 months to get accounts, right? That's unacceptable in today's world. In 2019, people need to have access to resources, especially the cloud promises, they have resources whenever they need that. And so what we do in CloudTamer is we have the ability to be able to allow users to get access to those accounts. We can help tie into external automation, scripts that organizations already have for provisioning, as well as just the actual automation that's built into CloudTamer itself to make that experience really as friendly as it is on the outside, but with the added benefits of the enterprise from a control perspective. So from budget enforcement perspective, there's a couple key points that we found in a lot of our customer environments. So one of which, especially here at Public Sector Summit, and a lot of federal customers as well as even state and local customers, we realize the way that the federal and public sector space accounts and allocates money is very different than a lot of times in other organizations. So money isn't a single color. It's not a single type. There's a period of time when that money is good for. There's a period of use that money is also good for. So we have a concept in CloudTamer that you can take and create what we call funding sources, and these can represent any amounts of money in your organization. You can allocate them down throughout your overall organization. You can go to a project, you can set a plan on how that money is going to be used. So that gives you a picture in real time instead of in spreadsheets that most organizations have of exactly what your organization is currently planning on using. The second piece of that is we actually tie into the AWS native reporting capabilities from a financial perspective, but enhance those and go beyond that. So we tie in to the detailed billing report, cost and usage reports that some of you guys may be familiar with. If you're into financial reporting in AWS, it's a fun world. If you haven't adventured there, please go ahead and do that. A little complex at times, but we tie into those because they provide a good source of truth. That's ultimately how you get billed. But then ultimately at the end of the day, those reports are only current as of about 12 hours ago. So they get delivered about on a 12-hour basis. And a lot of federal customers, as Mark mentioned with the Antideficiency Act in particular, are super concerned with a more real-time view of what their costs are. So we tie into AWS APIs. We have some custom algorithms that actually do estimated spending to give that real-time view for a customer of what their real cloud spending looks like. And with both of those pieces in place, how much you're planning on spending and how much you've actually spent, then we can use these custom enforcement actions. And customers like Mark are really kind of challenging us about ways that they want to be able to effectively monitor and control and enforce different kind of budgetary controls in their environment. And we've over the past year or so even added a lot more features there where customers can now extend those actions beyond just letting people know what's going on in the environment, but also going through and applying enforcement using external scripts that they've written in their environment, in terms of APIs that they can tie in CloudTamer with their existing scripts, which really makes it a very holistic and very integrated process. And then lastly, from a compliance automation perspective, one of the key things that we found, again, as organizations begin to grow and scale, there's typically policies that need to be adhered to. Sometimes it's organizational wide, sometimes it's things like FedRAMP, right? But other times it's stuff that's very specific to maybe a part of the organization, maybe the type of data that maybe one of these satellites is collecting, right? Or the type of data that a healthcare system is storing, right? Maybe not everything is PHI data. Maybe certain things are less sensitive. So we have a framework, again, aligning back to that organizational hierarchy that allows you to take and apply what we call cloud rules in CloudTamer to enforce those different policies, and again, becomes a very easy way to be able to set and also inherit those particular policies. And those rules can do a number of things. They can apply, restrictions on what people can access and what they can't. But they can also help provision accounts and add to the overall provisioning process so that when a new account comes online in that organization, depending on where it aligns, it has the added benefit of all those policies just automatically being applied. So that user, again, when they get access to that account, going back to that experience, that frictionless experience that the user is expecting, especially in the model on their own where they can swipe a credit card and get an account. Here in the enterprise, we try to make that same experience, but with the added benefit of these controls truly in place. We also have a way of allowing organizations and parts of the organizations to request exemptions from these particular policies as well, because we found that not every organization has the same policies that need to be applied. Sometimes you have a project, maybe it's one of these new missions that Mark was talking about that's being launched right now. They know that before they go live, it's going to be maybe 2020, 2021, and they know that in that process they're working through accreditation for new services and allowing exemptions for potentially having a brand new service that's released. But it's important to that mission. It's going to help them stay ahead of the curve. It's going to help them innovate more. So we have workflows that are built into CloudTamer that can be extended through APIs with other workflow systems in an organization, and that ultimately gives people a ton of control around that automation. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about our product, we have a booth at 618 out there, and I really encourage anybody that's interested to stop by. We have a team there that would love to talk to you a little bit more about our solution, kind of how we've tried to take these principles within governance at scale and automate them to have the enterprise greater control and hopefully speed of use to be able to embody this framework. So with that, I'll turn it over to Brett to kind of wrap us up.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So hopefully you learned a little bit about AWS Governance at Scale. We couldn't go into all the details of what it is, but we do have the white paper on our website. If you just Google it, you can find it relatively easy. We also have a lot of YouTube videos that we've done at previous summits if you want to learn kind of what other agencies are doing around governance at scale. But the whole idea is to automate, right? The idea, you need to, as you scale into the cloud, you need to retire your manual-based processes around compliance and finance and all those traditional spreadsheet approaches in order for you to scale effectively. Is a very key attribute to governance at scale, and it's some of the things we encourage customers to do. Either build it yourself or invest in a tool like CloudTamer. It's critically important so you can feel confident as you go into the cloud that all of the business rules, all the compliance rules are done automatically. And the other added benefit we don't talk a lot about this session is about compliance automation. By being able to apply policies that are applicable to across the organization, you can really speed up the authorization or the ATO process for your applications, which is better for everyone. If you want to learn more what we're doing with governance at scale, CloudTamer, even the Telos tool, Exacta 360, we've done a lot of pilots on how you could take tools like CloudTamer and Telos Exacta and bring them together in order to not automate the compliance, but also all the reporting for ATOs across a large, diverse enterprise that could add even thousands of applications. So that being said, we do have related breakouts that are around governance at scale. Please visit them if you can. The CloudTamer has their booth out in the expo area, and we wanted to thank you for coming, and please fill out your survey. We do like the input of what you guys like, what you don't like, and we take all that input from Amazon very seriously to make sure that when you guys spend your time with us, it's the most effective time possible. So thank you very much, and take a look at our website when you have a chance around AWS Governance at Scale.